Okay, guys. So this is Michelle, Dr. Michelle Dexter, and she's a sexologist and integral. Is that integrative? Is it, what do you say? How do you say that?
Yeah. Integrative
psychologist. Okay, so explain what that is.
Okay. Well, you brought up integral, so let's talk about the difference between integral and integrative, right? So integral means that there is something essential, and integrative means that we take all the parts and we look at the whole thing. So an integral approach, says like we're looking at the essential part of the human being, and an integrative approach says, let's look at all the parts of the human being. Let's look at their bodies and their unconscious minds and their conscious minds and their souls and their spirits and their biofield and everything else. So,
yeah. So I know that you are intuitive, but so like how, and like it mentioned a little bit about how you sometimes use that in your work. So how does that show up for you, and how do you put it into your work?
Oh my gosh, I am lost without it. So when I was getting my doctorate, I decided I wanted to study intuition. And so I gathered together 10 women who self-identified as intuitive because I wanted to know what the culture of intuitive women was about. And I'm going to distill my dissertation down to one tiny little sentence for you. Intuition is your compass. You are lost without it.
I love it.
Yeah.
So when did you feel like you tapped in, and how does that show up for you? Because like for me, like for me it was a big journey of learning how to trust my inner voice. Like sometimes I was always questioning, like if that's, and still I question outside influence, and I always have to like center myself and try to figure out like what I think about any given subject on my own without without like kind of programming in some way. So like that's how I center myself is, I just need a couple minutes to sit with myself and to breathe and just sit kind of like, and I almost like wait for like waves of inner talk that I trust to come. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's how I feel it. That's how I do it.
Absolutely. And so there are generally about 4 main ways that people experience their intuition. One is knowingness, and it sounds like that's primarily how you do it. Which people who are knowers, they say, I don't know how I know, but I just know that I know.
But I know.
And then there are people who are very kinesthetic. They actually feel something in their bodies. They usually talk about like a tingling sensation, or like some part of their body lights up and they're like, oh, that's it. And then some people are clairaudient. They literally hear what they call spirit or angels or guides or God, whatever word they use, that something that they feel like is outside of themselves. Some wisdom voice speaks to them using the voice in their own minds. And then there are the clairvoyants, who literally see visions that are symbolic, of something. Much like dreams are symbolic. So they kind of have to interpret it, like, oh, I see you climbing a hill and there's a red balloon. What does that mean for you? That type of thing. So I was probably a very intuitive child, but, like most children who go to school in America, that's kind of beaten out of us, like here, sit at this desk and learn how to, read and write,
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. That's not exactly, like, ooh, let's explore intuition. Right. And I remember in the first grade, I said something about like, and the spirit does this. And then the teacher was kind of stern and she says, spirit is not something we talk about in school. I'm like, oh, okay. 6-year-old me just got told.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, mine was like that too, but
yeah, right. So, those of us, who had to kind of clamp down on it and then rediscovered it as adults, kind of had to work on, kind of building it a little bit like a muscle, which is another finding I found among those 10 intuitive women, that intuition, once you practice it, it does get stronger and it does get clearer. So that's the good news. And I had a friend who was very intuitive, and I thought, well, if she can do it, I can do it. So I started reading some books. There's 2 books on the market that have the same name. They're both called You Are Psychic. And one is by a woman named Katz, K-A-T-Z, and another one is by a guy named Sanders, like sandpaper. And Yeah, both of them, have a lot of overlapping information and a lot of interesting exercises. And so I started playing around with the exercises. So the one by Katz, she talks about, like, imagine going into a movie theater and you sit down and you're calm and you simply ask, okay, movie theater, please play the movie that I need to see that will answer this question. And then you just imagine in your mind's eye that now that there's just this movie playing, like, whoa, that actually worked.
So yours is clairaudient or clair visual, or yeah.
So I experience intuition in all four of those ways, but I'm definitely probably more clairvoyant than the others. And then as the years have gone by and practicing, because again, it's about, sitting down and listening. And that's another thing that how the flavor of intuition is from your own mind speaking to you. Because, mind can be very creative, right? It can make up all kinds of fun things. So when it comes from that feeling of like, this came from outside of me, this was just knowledge that just dropped on me, from something outside of myself, that's the flavor of intuition rather than like, oh, I went hunting for it.
Yeah, I would say my strong, my most frequent is probably just knowing, but then I get really strong clairaudient where I have voices like, well, boom, like not, but I can't wield that. Like, that's just, that comes like, I've had some dead people's moms say something to me in my ear, or I've had, just like if I'm almost like in a, like we got held at gunpoint in Mexico and I had like this voice that told me that the gun wasn't real. Like a male voice was in my head and I was like, whoa, but I cannot decide to just hear stuff. It comes every once in a while.
Yes, exactly. And that's the flavor of it, right? That you're not out there looking for it. It's just boom, there it is.
So let's talk about the sexologist part.
Yes.
Like, how'd you get into all that?
Well, I was raised in one of those fundamentalist Christian religions where they have all kinds of strict rules. So I was 12 years old and I was invited with the teenage group to sit in, and they told us that they were going to talk about sex. And I thought, ooh, I'm 12 and I get to be with the teenagers and we're going to talk about sex. This ought to be great. Well, then they bring in this woman who's, college age. She was probably 18 or 19. And then she starts talking about all these nasty, horrible boys in college who, would try to French kiss her and, they would, touch her body. And that was so horrible. And how, no girl, who's a good Christian girl should allow that. And, we have to keep ourselves pure until we're married. And I walked out of that room going, well, that was a huge disappointment. So you can imagine that I got a lot of those messages, throughout my teenage years about, dressing modestly and, not engaging in sexual fantasy and not masturbating and certainly not exploring anything sexually, beyond holding hands and closed mouth kissing. So,
right,
that's not
no sex before marriage kind of thing, abstinence.
Yeah, all of that. Yeah. And, that didn't really sit well with my feelings about what it is to be human. Most people, they date in their teenage years and 20s and, they have these human desires, for connection, right? And of course, one of the functions, of human sexuality and human sexual expression is about that. It's about intimacy. It's about connection. It's about sharing. And so to have these rules about like, no, you will not share, it's like, but it feels like this is the most natural thing in the world. And you're telling me that I shouldn't want to do this? And I should just not do it because, well, I still don't understand the reasons why, now obviously, when it comes to sexual safety, there are, some good reasons why and pretty obvious, but it felt very, very punitive and like a denial of humanity and a denial of human expression. And that didn't feel good. So I didn't set out to be a sexologist. When I hung out my shingle with my private practice 17 years ago, I was a generalist, but 90% of the people who came to me had love and sex problems. And then
wow, okay.
long after that, I have a dual career. I'm also a college professor and a graduate school professor. And so shortly after I hung out my shingle, my boss at the university where I was teaching said, "Oh, can you start teaching human sexuality classes?"
You're like, oh, I guess it came to you.
Yeah, it did. It did. Yeah. So yeah, this really came to me. And I'm happy to do it, because obviously having lived my early years like that, now, I'm really, really interested in healthy human sexuality. So I did another study. I interviewed 10 people who self-identified as having healthy sexuality. And they told me wonderful things. They told me things like, yes, pornography ethically consumed, can be an enhancement to sexuality. And they told me about how they liked their bodies. And they told me about how they had, purely lust body-to-body sexual experiences. And those were just as valuable to them as the big spiritual ones, where they felt like they were out of their body, but in their body and like connected to the cosmos and, all of that.
So is it mainly like when people come to you with sexual problems, are they mainly like within their relationship? Well, or, like oh, they're married and they want to talk about that, or they're in some sort of relationship, or is it more like, do they come to you with like questions about their own sexuality, or like what kind of spectrum do you usually tend to work in?
All of the above. I tend to work with a lot of men who are struggling with erectile functioning.
Okay.
And also a lot of women who are struggling with painful sex conditions, and also mismatched libido or low libido. I get a lot of people who are coming in saying, that I'm married or I'm in a partnership and our libido just does not match. How do we salvage this?
That is the craziest thing to me, because I actually was watching this YouTube video on Marissa Pearce and John Gray the other day, and she was saying that was one of her main things she got was, she's like, and I don't understand why the people with the same libido don't ever find each other. It always seems to be opposite. And but it really does. Like, I have so many friends I know that are in situations that are mismatched, and it's not always like only the girl doesn't want to. It's every gender is different. So it is kind of weird that they don't seem to match up a lot together.
Yeah, it's a pretty common problem.
I mean, I guess it's something that develops over time, right? It's not usually from day one.
Does, because in the beginning, people often come to a relationship with a sexual deficit, meaning that they haven't had sexual expression for a while, and then they meet somebody and it's that new relationship energy where it's super exciting, and they want that intimacy, they want that connection, and it's super fun. And then after a while it just kind of wanes, and this is kind of a biological issue too. They talk about all the neurotransmitters, and the dopamine, that's you're so high on that new person, and then after 1 to 3 years, all that dopamine is kind of worn off in your brain. And so, you look at that person and instead now you have feelings of well-being rather than excitement, so it's like, nah, I've already had you. Nah, we'll get around to it maybe next Thursday.
Yeah. So do you feel like it's emotional, or do you feel like these kinds of things are chemical? Like,
well, again, because I take an integrative perspective, I'm interested in looking at the body, the mind, and the spirit. So it's all of it. It's biological, it's emotional, it's mental, and it's spiritual. And I have to tell you, I get a lot of people who come to me with religious trauma, because I always like to start with, okay, and our goals are based on the ideal situation for that particular person. So if a person comes in and says, I want to have a happy, healthy sex life with my partner, I say, great, that's your ideal situation. That's our goal. That's where we're going to start. And so then we start looking at what are the root causes that are getting in the way of that person achieving that goal. And wouldn't you know, 9 times out of 10, that there's either some religious trauma or there's some cultural trauma around sex and sexuality. Even yesterday, I had a client who came in and her 15-year-old son didn't put 2 and 2 together that his mom was sleeping with her new boyfriend. And when he found evidence of such, that he kind of freaked out. And he was like, Mom, I can't believe that you're sleeping with this guy. And she's like, people have sex. And he's like, but sex is for reproduction. And she was like, who told you that? That's only one of the purposes of sex. Right.
Yeah. And navigating it. There's such a taboo too in our society with how to navigate everything with our children. Like, I know so many people whose parents, like, their idea of sex education with their parents was just like, did you take that class at school? Cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And I've met a lot of people where they didn't even get that, you know. And even when I was teaching human sexuality classes at the university, some of the parents, you know, would you know, really balk, you know, when I would present the unit about educating children about sex and sexuality in age appropriate ways. You know, I remember one man, he had an 11-year-old daughter. He was, you know, probably in his 40s, just to give context. And he was like, I'm uncomfortable. I don't want to talk to my 11-year-old daughter about sex and sexuality. I want her mom to do it. And I said, you know what? She could really, really benefit from your perspective as a man, and number two, as her dad who loves her. And I'm not saying that you guys need to get into all the nitty gritty. I mean, at 11, you know, she needs to know the mechanics of intercourse and how babies are made. And you know, that there is such a thing as, you know, gay people and trans people. And, you know, and then beyond that, she doesn't necessarily need a lot of information right now, but she does need to have conversations about dating and about flirting and about boundaries. That's probably the most important thing to talk to tweens and teens about boundaries. Mm-hmm. You know, in my life, we talk a lot about boundaries, and I'm not talking about just, you know, like the verbal boundaries or behavioral boundaries. I'm also talking about energetic boundaries. You know, how does it feel in your body when you have a good sexual boundary? You know, and a lot of people, you know, they haven't considered that because their boundaries have been so broken down, you know. I'll give a very quick example. This happened to me. I had done, you know, my work, and I had my sexual boundaries all set, and that felt really good. And, you know, and I wasn't getting inappropriate stuff happening to me anymore. And then I went to the beach with a friend who happened to be male. And I had always made it very clear to this man, look, you know what, I'm not available for anything romantic. If you want to be my friend, this is a platonic relationship. And, you know, I asked him to rub sunscreen on my back, and he took that opportunity to grab my breast.
Okay.
Yeah. And I thought, all right, well, friendship over, number one. And number two, you know, he'd broken my sexual boundary at that point, right? And so I had to look at that and say, okay, all right, I got to put my boundaries back up. So I had to look at, you know, how did that make me feel in that moment? So I felt unsafe, and I felt a bit violated, and I felt disrespected. And so then I did, you know, the processes that I use. I have, you know, a menu where I have 43 different methodologies and hundreds of techniques. But one of the ones that I use a lot is UFO pose, which has nothing to do with aliens or spaceships.
Oh, I love UFOs.
Yeah. Yeah, it stands for unwinding the frontal and occipital lobe.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so it's one hand on the forehead and the other hand on the occiput, and it doesn't matter which hand goes in front or back.
Okay. Yeah. I've kind of heard this for like activating your merkabah in your head. I don't know, but how do you, what do you guys do with it?
Well, it does a lot of things. It turns out that you have a pretty significant chakra right there back in your,
like where a low ponytail would go, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Right there on the ridge of your head.
Okay.
In the back. Yeah. Chakra back there. It's a minor chakra, but it's still a chakra. And then of course, you know, you've got a major chakra right here, your third eye or brow chakra right here. So simply by aligning the chakras, that's helpful. And then in traditional Chinese medicine, it turns out that there's, you know, about 100 different acupressure points or acupoints right there on the forehead. But there are 5 that are really, really critical. 2 right here are for your amygdala, which is the part of your brain that's always scanning the environment for threat.
Like your hairline?
Right? Yeah, right to your hairline. Yep. So yeah, so these calm that feeling of I feel threatened, you know, so you can feel safe just by holding that. Mm-hmm. And then right here in the middle of your hairline, that one is your brain point. So that calms your brain. And then right here in the middle of your forehead, so between the pupils of your eyes and your hairline right there, those 2 points, these are your emotional release points. You know, so any trapped emotion in the body, you know, but just by holding those points, and thinking about it, you can pretty much release it. So, you know, shame, fear, anxiety, rage, whatever it is. Yeah. So when you put your over your forehead, you've covered not only the chakra, but you've also covered those 5 really important points. And then when you hold the back of your head, now you're allowing your whole brain to communicate with itself. Now the brain,
so it's like a little cocoon within yourself.
It is. Yeah, it is.
I like it. It does feel comforting.
Right? Right?
Yeah, I'm like, oh.
Yeah, it's very relaxing. You know, this is a perfect, you know, just way to do stress relief, right? You know, so when my ex-friend, you know, did that, I was like, okay, I'm just going to go home and I'm going to hold my head and I'm going to build back up my boundaries, because, here's the reality is like, okay, I was vulnerable, but I handled it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, so like, okay, do you, when you're talking to somebody and you get like an intuitive tap, do you do you let them know like, okay, my intuition is telling me this, or do you just kind of just say it and then like, they don't need to know where it came from for you?
It depends on the person and it depends on the circumstances. So I also use applied kinesiology muscle testing, which is where you're accessing the knowledge of the body. So, they talk about the biofield. And they also talk about, the aura or the etheric field. They're often talking about very similar things. So the field, this information field that surrounds our bodies, it's taking in trillions of bits of information every single second. And the conscious mind is taking in a few. So it basically comes down to the field is taking in 99.999% of the information, and conscious mind is taking in about 0.0001. So what we're consciously aware of is not very much. And to add to this, neurologically, when they've done MRI studies about, the conscious parts of the brain versus unconscious parts of the brain and measured bits of information, it turns out that the conscious parts of the brain can think, I put that in quotes, think about 30 thoughts per second. And when I heard that, I was like, 30 thoughts per second consciously. Wow, that
sounds like a lot.
Yeah, right? And then they looked at the unconscious parts of the brain, and the unconscious structures of the brain can, again, think 2.5 million thoughts per second.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. So the reason why I use applied kinesiology muscle testing is because I want to tap into that 99.99% of information that's there in the field. Because again, conscious mind is kind of like pea brain compared to that, right? And so sometimes, when I'm using, the reflexes, to use a muscle test, show me yes, that means congruent, show me no, when the muscles go weak, the strong muscle is congruent, weak muscle is incongruent. The reflexes or the muscles will go weak, and I'll think, well, I don't know why, so I'm not going to say that. But I'll file it away, and maybe I'll write it down in my little notes, for later. And then later it will come out and it will be appropriate. Let me give you an example. So I had a client today, and this woman really believes in autocratic parenting. She just is the type of mom where, her kid will ask for something and her answer will just be no, because I said so. Right. That's the reason. Quit backing talk or talking back.
Talking back. Yeah.
Yeah, talking back. Yeah. And so you can imagine that she's, had some difficult times with her kids, and now that they're adults, they're not exactly, how shall we say, the most well-adjusted.
Wonder why. Yeah.
Yeah. Children who are raised in those types of environments tend to become rather isolated. They tend toward depression, and they also become very rebellious toward their parents. So that's what's happening with her kids. No surprise. So intuitively, I feel like I really do need to give her some guidance, around being more democratic. But I can't blast her with that. I can't just tell her, look, you got to be democratic with your kids, and you've got to tell them why you're thinking these things and why you're making the decisions you're making, because that's not going to go well for her. She's just going to be defensive with me and probably never come back.
Right.
But if I can be gentle with her, and I muscle test the things that I say to her, and I'm very gentle in the way that I present things, because the intuition will come and I'll hear something like, tell her about, say, having boundaries, with her children around asking about their grades, because that's, for example, something that came up. And so then I'll muscle test, like, okay, so should I say it directly? No. Okay. So I'll muscle test, what to say, and I'll get something like, be gentle. And so then I'll say something to her like, I'm very curious, what would happen is when you asked your child about their grades, if you approach them in a way where you said something like, hey, I really hope you're doing well. And if you're not, let's, focus on making an improvement plan. And either way, you have my love and you have my, and now that I've said that, how are your grades?
So do you find that, is it frustrating for you when maybe they don't take your advice at all? It's like,
well, yeah, I figure that my job is never to give advice. My job is only to ask questions and only to guide.
okay.
Yeah. I'm not an advice giver. That would be a consultant. Yeah. So people, if they're work with me, it's going to be because they have a level of motivation. And one of the things that I like to work on in the very first few sessions, probably the first or second session with a person, is muscle testing and finding out if there's anything unconscious that's actually blocking them from their motivation and their willingness to get better. Because it can turn out that there's actually several things that can get in the way. And there, of course, one woman to me, she weighed 300 pounds. She said she wanted to lose weight. I said, great, I'm happy to help you with that. So we put up the goal, lose weight, be the ideal weight. And so then we muscle test, are you ready, willing, and able to achieve this goal? Option to need this for you. Well, it turned out that she didn't want to change. There was a part of her that was like, and by the way, she was eating cookies for breakfast. That was her breakfast every single day. She wanted to just continue to eat her cookies and not change. Right. And I said, all right, well, we've got to start right there, because until that part is ready, willing, and able to change, we're not going to make any progress. I can put you on a diet plan. I can, motivate you. I can do anything I want to do.
So when we talk about muscle testing now, so when you're talking to them, are you literally doing this to yourself to sort of just like know things like on how you're going to talk to them yourself? And then are you then also teaching them their way to muscle test themselves? Like how important is the muscle testing for you in your practice?
Oh my, muscle testing is critical. Yeah, I can't do my work without it. So when I'm muscle testing myself, I muscle test with my hands because that's the quickest and easiest way to do it. So you demonstrated this way, which I use sometimes, but most of the time I just use the cross finger technique. So I cross my fingers, and this is a yes, it's nice and strong, and this is a no.
Oh, so whether or not you can bend your fingers together. Oh, okay, interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because.
Yeah, I've not heard of that one. Does it matter if it's left or right hand, or does it just both?
Doesn't matter. No. Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
And you put your pinky finger over your middle finger.
My index finger over my middle finger.
Index, yeah, sorry. Cool.
That's okay. Do what you meant.
So what about Yeah, I know, but the podcast people will be like, what? The pinky over the, okay. So do you do EMF ever, like the emotional freedom tapping?
Oh, EFT, emotional freedom technique, that one?
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah. So to answer your first question, I do train all of my clients to muscle test themselves. It's really important. And I do use EFT, emotional freedom technique, or the methodology that I use primarily is something called HBLU, which stands for healing from the body level up. And the philosophy behind it is, again, very integrative, that you've got to heal all the parts. So you've got to heal the body, the unconscious mind, the conscious mind, the energy body, the soul or the spirit, and also all the unknown levels above and beyond the soul or spirit. So all 6 levels get healed.
Okay.
Yeah. Looping back, looping back to the woman who ate cookies for breakfast but was overweight, we had to, deal with her biological craving for sugar. And we also had to deal with the part of her that was, basically like a petulant child, because we've all got petulant child parts inside of us, right? And so the petulant child going, I want my cookies.
Right, the Veruca salt.
So once we were able to heal that part up and grow the part up, spontaneously, she didn't want cookies for breakfast anymore. And she started eating things like eggs.
Go figure. That's
the last time I saw her, she'd lost something like 30 pounds.
That's pretty good. I mean, that counts. So I heard you talk about how like guys have chemical emotional cycles like every 7 days. What was that? Like, how women have their cycle once a month. You said that guys cycle through their hormones too?
Yeah, more seasonally. Yeah. So women have more variety of hormones, but certainly men, are driven by hormones just as much as women. And obviously the most prevalent male hormone is testosterone. And testosterone cycles really, really rapidly. So testosterone cycles throughout the day, and it's on a pretty quick cycle of about 20 minutes. So this is why I say that, yeah, if your man is in a bad mood, give him 20 minutes. He'll probably feel better.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. That's quite a difference from us, I suppose.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. So whereas women tend to cycle on average about 28 days, men tend to cycle a little more seasonally, but also other hormones tend to cycle pretty fast, like within a few days. So, yeah. So when men are complaining about like, oh, women are so hormonal, I always want to shoot back. So are you.
Or it sounds like especially you are in some ways.
Yeah, actually, because testosterone, I mean, to quote the great philosopher Ken Wilber, he said, if testosterone could talk, it would say, fuck it or kill it.
Yeah.
It really, really would. There's a magazine that my brother subscribes to, and every single cover is the same. It's a scantily clad woman holding a firearm. And I'm like, okay, so this is central. Fuck it or kill it.
Yeah, that one does both for you. So there you go.
Yeah, so when men, they feel aggressive and they feel like this sense of like, shut up, don't cry, walk it off, why are you so emotional? That's testosterone talking. And what I found very interesting is that transgendered people, when they've done hormone therapy, particularly female to male transgendered people, when they started taking testosterone, suddenly they feel very annoyed by women's emotionality, whereas before they felt like they understood it.
Wow. Yeah, I could see that. Yeah. So it is interesting how sometimes you wonder, well, I mean, I even see that within myself. Like if I'm like right before I'm about to start my period, like there are times where I'll be like, what is this salty solution coming from my eyes? Oh, I'm super emotional. Like, why am I so, like I'm outside of myself. It's almost like there's another me that like the hormones can sometimes take over, where you're like, oh, something else is driving here for a second. What is this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's true. I've had those experiences too. I mean, I remember, one moment where I was, terribly PMSy and just irritated at my then boyfriend all day long. And I found myself like crying, like screaming at the sky, this life is too hard. Like, wow. Obviously I am not really okay today, but most of the time I don't feel that way. But on that particular day, yeah, that was feeling very, very real.
So, okay, about like being a psychiatrist or a psychologist. Sorry, I always get those words. I guess is that a common thing? People always get those words mixed up.
They do, yeah. So a psychiatrist is a medical doctor, and that person is very much focused on the brain and medication.
Okay.
And a psychologist went to graduate school and wrote a doctoral dissertation, and then focuses on research and doing clinical practice generally. And by the way, I'm actually not a clinical psychologist. A lot of people think that that just because I have psychologist in my title that I do clinical, and that's actually not true. So an integrative psychologist gets to work with people who are already doing pretty well, and they want their lives to be even better.
So it's I mean in some how closely related is that to life coaching?
So life coaching has no regulation whatsoever. So anybody under the sun can say, I'm a coach.
Okay.
Yeah. Whereas, generally being a psychologist, you do need to have a PsyD degree, Doctor of Psychology, or a PhD, Doctor of Philosophy of Psychology.
Okay, so how common is it? Because I don't really think I've heard of anybody else who, is paring that with somebody who's even open to intuition.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and maybe that's my own assumption of the whole thing, but I always sort of felt that it was like, uh, that's kind of like faux pas, like that's left at the door. So how do you how do you integrate those two things together?
So the big umbrella is integrative psychology. And then under the umbrella of integrative psychology is energy psychology. And energy psychology has been around for about 40 plus years now. And it originated in California. And it was the idea of, we've got to understand this subtle energy system that the ancients have been talking about. So, the principles of traditional Chinese medicine, they were writing about those things 20,000 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah. The ancient chakra systems, the practices have been around for at least 3,000 years, and the text, for several thousand years before that. So, I always make the joke, surely somebody by now would have noticed if this stuff didn't work.
I mean, there's also like Rupert Sheldrake, who does the morphogenetic field study. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot to this stuff. There really is.
Yeah, exactly. And graduate school, where I am currently a professor at the California Institute for Human Science, that's basically what we do. We're a research center and we do original research on these energy studies. We have a Faraday cage, which is a big copper cage. It's like a big room. It's about a 10 by 8 room. And you go inside, you lock the door, and it completely blocks all electromagnetic frequency.
Right.
There's no EMF in there. And so then you can do experiments, so they've done some experiments with like sending thoughts and had some success with that. And sending energy. And we have some really cool technology there. Our founder, Dr. Motoyama, invented an AMI device. It's the apparatus for meridian identification. And so this little machine can tell you which meridians are all clogged up and which ones are open. And so we love to do experiments.
That's cool.
Okay. All right, hook your hand up to the machine, and we're going to show which meridians are clogged. And now we're going to do an energy psychology technique. And now, oh, look, they're open. Look at that.
That's awesome. That's really awesome. Yeah, I mean, well, I do some energy healing too, and I'm really into, well, I'm into all kinds of this stuff too. But like I've been researching getting one of those like canopy things for my bed, because I'm thinking ooh, I wonder if I should sleep underneath the Faraday cage, just to completely get like uninterrupted dreams, or, just complete shielding of outside influence. I don't know if it would make a difference or not. Anyway, they're very expensive.
They are. Yeah. There's a guy I met in Sedona. He runs a company called Organite, like knights on a horse.
Oh.
And yeah. And he took some declassified Russian technology and now makes these beautiful art pyramids that he's figured out how to have them absorb EMF. And I have to tell you that, they're really, really great. In fact, I even have a little tiny one I carry here in my purse to block the EMF from my cell phone. So this is a little disc. You can see it's about a quarter. And then there are other, bigger pyramids. So that's, what I have in the house. And so I really like those, there's lots and lots of technology out there.
There is, yeah. I like the piezoelectricity concept, and Organite in general. Like, I think Wilhelm Reich, is he the one who invented orgone? I think. Anyway, yeah. But I have a big pyramid that's by my bed that one of my friends made. She's all into making them, and I went and did some crystal digging. So I'm like, ooh, I'm gonna learn how to make Organite with my own crystals. Yeah. But I don't know if I'll end up. I mean, I'll end up doing it, but I don't know if I'll end up like that's gonna be a thing I do. But I definitely want to experiment with those things. Like I got an EMF reader too. Like, nice. I'm starting to get cray with this stuff. Like, I'm starting to be like, but I mean, because I do feel like we are energetic beings, and we show very little attention to these things.
Well, exactly. And the ancients knew this, and they paid a lot of attention to it. So they wrote about things like, ki, chi, prana, all those words, because they actually understood that it's your energy body radiates you. Yeah. Your energy body makes up this. You know, so like I said, you know, now we have all this fancy technology to actually be able to show, you know, the biofield or the energy body. In addition to the AMI, there's one called the BioWell, and then there's a biofield viewer that you can stand in front of this camera, and it literally shows you your energy field, and it's in real time. You know, so
is that like one of those Aura cameras, like where it'll show you what your aura, like, is that kind of similar technology?
It's a little more sophisticated than that.
Okay.
The Aura cameras, the Kirlian photography just kind of shows you the colors, whereas this will literally show you like, oh, look, there's actually a hole in the field right here. Or, oh, look, there's all these black dots in the field over here.
Ooh, I wonder how much does one of those machines cost?
I think a few $1,000s, but like I said, my colleagues at the California Institute for Human Science, they'll be happy to if you can show up in person, you know, do a reading.
Yeah, that'd be cool. Yeah. So, so how does a person work with you? Like, do you do, I mean, especially with like COVID stuff or whatever, I mean, like, I guess you could take people from all over. You could just do it on Zoom.
Yeah, exactly. So for people who are local to San Diego, I have my office here at Indigo Dragon Wellness Center in Encinitas. And then for people who are not local, then I work on Zoom. And obviously I'm able to work with people around the world.
And you've also been running, like I took a class that you put on with Terry Seltzer, what was that, 2 weeks ago?
I think so.
Maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago.
Whatever.
Which was super cool. And it sounds like you guys are going to be doing some more of those.
Yes. Yeah. So I was recently appointed as the sole organizer for that group. So that is the Association for Comprehensive Energy Psychology. And I'm now solely in charge of the San Diego chapter for that group.
Okay, cool. And so you're going to have like guest speakers come in and talk about their preferred subjects and.
Yeah. So until the pandemic is done, we're going to continue on Zoom. And I think we're going to have 6 meetings next year. And they will be on Saturdays, about an hour and a half. And I'm taking proposals. You know, so anybody who wants to write a short proposal for me about something about energy psychology that would be educational and include an experiential component so that people could walk away with a new tool. That's what I'm looking for. Okay,
great. And I'm including all that information in the description below. So that's cool. They'll have links and stuff to that.
Cool.
And yeah.
So people are interested in working with me. I am taking new clients in my practice, so I'm certainly open to that. And I'm also running, you know, a series of workshops on other fun things. I have one coming up. My next one is going to be on the Enneagram. It's going to be a 3-part series on Zoom. And your Enneagram is your spiritual personality type. So you're going to learn what's your Enneagram type, what's your spiritual personality type, and you're actually going to learn how to upgrade it. Because it turns out that it's kind of like bugs in computer code, you know, that every part, or I should say every type, there's 9 types, that all of them have bugs in the code. And so the bug will say something like, I'm unlovable, or I can't get my needs met.
Okay,
So then we learn how to upgrade the code and transform the code into something like, I am lovable and I can get my needs met and people like me.
So, I mean, it seems like self-love is, I mean, from my experience with people I know, it seems to be like the most prevalent problem that we have in this society. It's almost as if like the society is set up to make us all have low self-esteem. So like, what's your personal method of like, what's a way in which you help people get over that bump?
That is an absolutely huge problem and practically universal. And one of the things that I love helping people with. And so again, I work very systematically. I always say, what's the ideal situation? Okay, that's our goal. So the goal is very simple, to love myself fully. And then we start looking at all the root causes. And most of the time, root causes are things like trauma. And when I'm talking about trauma, I'm talking about everything from little t trauma to the big T trauma. You know, and a lot of times people, you know, they don't think about the little t trauma. You know, they don't think about, you know, the times where, you know, a person made them feel maybe less than or insulted them in some way, maybe made fun of their clothing or the way they said something or, you know, something they presented, you know, whatever else. And, you know, they just kind of, you know, forget about it. And that's a real shame, you know, because here's the thing is that those things damage us. They damage our energy bodies and therefore they damage our physical bodies.
And they add up.
And they add up. They add up, yeah. And in fact, Western science has now embraced this idea. Dr. Candace Pert wrote a seminal book called The Molecules of Emotion, where she was able to show that, look, when you're having these negative emotions, i.e. traumatic emotions, that those things damage your cells.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
yeah.
like,
so
and I definitely, it may be anecdotal or not, but like, from my view of the world, it's like, I think like, I see a lot of connection with emotional disease and cancer, like just from people I've known. Like, I mean, yeah, I do feel like we can make ourselves sick.
We can, absolutely. Most of the time, cancer is something got under my skin or something is eating me. And if you look at the part of the body, it becomes pretty obvious. So breast cancer is often about, feeling like I didn't get to express my nurturing, or I didn't get nurtured.
Yeah.
Yeah. And colon cancer is I held on to my shit.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
That's actually pretty deep though. It really is. Cause I mean,
yeah. It is. Yeah. And pancreatic cancer, losing the sweetness of life. Yeah. And liver is usually tied to anger. So liver cancer, these are usually very, very angry people.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I wish they would do sort of like a study about that, but
that's true. And, you can look at any traditional Chinese medicine chart and look at what's the emotion associated with a particular organ, and it will show you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Ayurvedic as well. Ayurvedic has a lot of, yeah.
Yeah. Yes. Yes, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Just look at where the chakra is and what's going on there. Yeah. So yeah,
okay.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I was just gonna say, so is there anything else that, actually 2 questions. One question, like I was gonna say, is like, what do you think is going on here in reality? Like what's your big picture in reality? Do you think like, this is kind of a crazy question, but I like to ask it a lot of people, just kind of like, what do you think consciousness is, or what is it to you, kind of thing? And then I have another question after that, but yeah.
Okay. So I tend towards a Jungian or depth psychology perspective. So Carl Jung talked about the personal unconscious coexisting with the collective unconscious. So to me, consciousness is I have my own personal unconscious, and that's what I am projecting out into the world and what the world is reflecting back to me. So if I believe that, for example, I'm unlovable, I'm sending that out, and then the world reflects it back to me, and I have those experiences. And that's, by the way, why I love my work, is because I can change my unconscious mind, and then things change for me. Right. And I don't like this, that I suffered with clinical depression for a lot of years of my life. And, I managed to be pretty functional. I mean, keep a job and, go shopping and for the, the groceries and whatnot. But, I spent a lot of time lying on the couch and not being very functional. And because of the work and looking at those limiting beliefs and looking at those traumas and cleaning them up and transforming them to a higher vibration, now what I put out is the world is fine, I'm fine, and the world reflects that back to me.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah. I'm not saying that, the world is perfect, but, and so then, that's my personal unconscious, that's my consciousness, that's how I'm experiencing the world. And then there's the collective, right? And so the collective, has, what we're all participating in. And when we are participating in the collective, we can kind of get swept away in it. Like this most recent election, oh my gosh, people were having so many feelings, big feelings. Mm-hmm. That was a big collective, type of, kind of watershed.
Well, and we're still in a lot of feelings with the pandemic at large, like worldwide, Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. But I found it very interesting, that some people had big feelings about it, and other people like just big feelings, and other people were just like, well, they were just very zen about it. This is the way that it is. This
Yeah. It's pretty crazy.
Yeah. So that's kind of an example of how, the personal operates within the collective. That we don't necessarily have control over the collective, but we do have control over ourselves. We can choose, like, am I going to let go of my trapped emotion? Am I going to hold my head and let go of my trapped emotion? Am I going to meditate and let go of my trapped emotion? Am I going to do yoga and let go of my trapped emotion? What am I going to do? What tool am I going to use in my toolbox? Because we've all got tools to let go. Yeah.
I love that. Okay. And my last question is, okay, is there anything that you wanted to talk about that I didn't get to, or that maybe you like, or like a give, or something that you think like maybe you would want to leave people with that they should just know, like a tip or something?
Yeah, to sum up, trapped emotion and trauma and limiting beliefs are probably the three biggest stumbling blocks for people. And I love to help people get over those things. So I love to have people help them to get happily married or get happily partnered, and to have them have happy, healthy sex lives and to feel good about themselves and love themselves. So those are the three areas that I'm, just really, really love working with. But I also, love to work with depression and anxiety and all that other stuff too. So, whatever people want to work on to create their best lives, I'm happy to treat them. And let's see, there was one other thing. Oh yeah, and then the takeaway, yeah, use your tools. Use what works for you. Yeah, movement counts for a lot. So stretch, bend, do some yoga, and hold your head. I'm
gonna start doing that.
Yeah, I'm such a huge advocate for this because it's practically a panacea. It works for about 90% of everything, 90% of the time, and it doesn't take long. You can seriously, most people feel better about whatever thing they're thinking about that's upsetting them within 30 seconds. The longest I've ever somebody needed to hold their head was 3 minutes. I'm like, that's a 3-minute letting go of that much. Amazing.
That really is that's a great tool to have. And it's definitely a good thing to start with. And then,
Yes. Yeah. Super simple. So yeah, I've got plenty of other fun tools like that, but that's probably my favorite one.
Very, very cool. All right, Miss Michelle, this has been super fun. And again, I'm putting all the information for people down there if they want to get a hold of you. And even if they need to check out your classes, your workshops and stuff that's, if you don't want to work one-on-one, you should at least take a class because they're super fun, super affordable, super awesome. So yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much. This has been really super fun.
Thank you too.